Olivia had exactly 2 seconds to decide. 2 seconds before Lee Soo-min's hand would strike her face in front of the most dangerous men in Seoul. She could flinch, tighten her eyes, and take the blow like she had 1,000 times before, or she could do the one thing that would change the rules of the game forever. She chose the third option in her head. As his palms swung through the air, she didn't cower. She stepped forward, closing the distance until her chest almost touched his pinstripe suit, and looked him straight in the eyes. The room seemed to freeze. The clinking of crystal stopped. The breathing of 100 guests hitched. Soo-min's hand stopped an inch from her skin, his expression shifting from rage to pure confusion, as if a doll had suddenly started to speak. And suddenly, the reality of the secret she had kept for 20 years slammed into her chest. She was done being a trophy. Hey besties. Welcome to Clemency Love Stories. If you're ready to see a corporate bully get what's coming to him, hit that subscribe button. Let us know where you're watching from. Is it morning or night for you? Now, let's get back to the takedown. You should have killed me when you had the chance, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the silence. Because he's already inside the building. And he's coming for everything you own. But instead of acting worried, Soo-min's lips curved into a slow, cruel smile. Amused. Dangerous, he murmured, his voice a low growl. What the hell is this, Olivia? Then she felt it. The subtle shift in the room, the way the guards at the door suddenly went unnaturally still. Soo-min's hand moved, not to strike her, but to grip her chin, forcing her to stay exactly where she was.
Danger?
You think you know danger? The relaxed, arrogant smile on his face said it all. When she tried to pull back, he leaned closer, his voice smooth and cold in her ear. I know you've been hiding things, Soo-min whispered. But do you have any idea what you've just invited into this house? Olivia's heart stopped. When she looked past his shoulder toward the grand entrance, something had changed. The shadows in the doorway were moving. Something dark. Something that made her realize she'd just made the best, or worst, decision of her life. Across the ballroom, the high-ranking board members had gone pale. Their eyes darted toward the shadows. Hands twitched toward holsters beneath silk jackets. The tension in the air thickened, becoming lethal. Then the sound came, not a gunshot, but the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots on marble. Before Soo-min could even process the breach, the light shattered. Glass exploded from the chandeliers above. The sound was deafening. Before Olivia could scream, a figure moved fast.
Impossibly fast.
A hand wrapped around her waist, and she was pulled sideways, spun behind a thick marble pillar just as a flashbang grenade blinded the room. Her back hit the cold stone. A body pressed against her, pinning her there, shielding her completely. He was tall, solid, and smelled of gunpowder and rain. Nothing like the expensive cologne of the Mafia. Stay here, he said. His voice was calm, controlled, like a storm that had finally arrived. Don't move, Mom. Not until I've cleared the floor. Olivia couldn't have moved if she tried. Her legs had turned to water. Her whole body shook violently, and she couldn't tell if it was from the screams in the ballroom or the realization that the boy she had sent away to save was now the man standing between her and death. The room erupted into chaos. Screams, running footsteps, tables crashing over. Liam pulled a tactical sidearm from his vest. The movement was smooth, practiced, like he'd been born for this. He leaned around the pillar, his jaw inches from her face. He aimed. He fired. Olivia sat in front of her large mirror, but she didn't really see herself. She saw a doll. Her hair was pulled back into a perfect, tight bun. Her dress was made of dark silk that felt heavy and cold against her skin. This was her life in the Lee mansion. Everything was expensive, everything was beautiful, and everything was a lie. To the world, she was the lucky wife of Lee Soo-min. To herself, she was a bird in a cage made of gold. Every morning was the same. She woke up in a room that was too quiet. She ate breakfast at a table that was too long. The house was filled with guards in black suits. They didn't look at her like she was a person. They looked at her like she was a piece of furniture that might try to run away. She wasn't allowed to leave the gates without permission. She wasn't allowed to make phone calls. Most of the time, She wasn't even allowed to think for herself. Sumin was a man who loved control. He liked his coffee at a certain temperature, and he liked his wife at a certain distance. When he walked into a room, the air seemed to get thinner. He didn't use many words, but when he spoke, his voice was like a whip. Olivia had learned to stay silent. She had learned to keep her head down. If she made herself small enough, she hoped he wouldn't notice her. But there was one thing that kept her going. It was a secret hidden beneath the floorboards of her closet. Once a week, a small, plain envelope would appear. She never saw who delivered it. It wasn't like the fancy invitations or the legal papers that usually came to the house. It was just a simple piece of paper with no return address. The guards never found them because the person who sent them knew exactly where the security cameras had blind spots. Olivia walked to her closet and made sure the bedroom door was locked. She knelt down and pulled back the corner of the rug. She used a small tool to lift the loose board. Inside was a stack of letters. She pulled out the newest one. The handwriting was strong and bold. It didn't look like the messy scribbles of a child anymore. It looked like the writing of a man who knew what he wanted.
Dear Mom, the letter began.
I am counting the days. I know what he does. I know how he treats you. Every time I see a picture of you in the news, I look at your eyes. I can see the fear you try to hide.
But don't worry.
I am not that scared little boy you sent away anymore. I have spent every day getting stronger. I have built something he can never understand. Stay brave. The storm is coming, and I am the one bringing it. Love, Liam. Olivia pressed the paper to her heart. She could feel a single tear track down her cheek. 10 years ago, she had made the hardest choice of her life. She had realized that Sumin was starting to look at Liam as a tool for his mafia business. She knew that if Liam stayed, he would either become a monster or be killed by one. So, she had worked with a trusted friend to fake a boarding school trip and send him far away under a different name. She told Sumin that the boy was gone, but she never told him where. For a decade, she had taken every insult and every cold look from her husband just to keep the spotlight away from her son. She had let herself be the victim so Liam could be free. She heard a heavy footstep in the hallway. It was the sound of Sumin's expensive leather shoes. Quickly, she tucked the letter back into the hole and slid the board into place. She stood up and smoothed her dress just as the door handle turned. Sumin walked in, his face as cold as stone. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how she was. He just looked at her with judgmental eyes. The gala is tonight, Olivia, he said. His voice was flat. The other families will be watching. You will wear the green dress. You will smile when I tell you to smile. Do not embarrass me. I understand, Olivia whispered, looking at the floor. Good, he said, turning to leave. Remember your place. You are mine. Nothing more. As the door slammed shut, Olivia felt the weight of the cage pressing down on her again. But this time, it was different. She could still feel the phantom warmth of the letter against her chest. Sumin thought he was the most powerful man in the city, but he was wrong. He thought he was in control, but he didn't know that the little boy he had forgotten was now a man standing at the gates. The gala was going to be a night of shame, but for the first time, Olivia knew it wouldn't be hers. The heavy silk of the dress felt like ice against Olivia's skin. It was a deep, bruising purple, cut so low and so tight that she could hardly draw a full breath. As she stood before the tall mirror in the dressing room, she didn't see the girl who had spent years studying under the warm sun of her home. Instead, she saw a stranger, someone fragile and exposed. Sumin leaned against the doorframe, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, watching her with eyes that held no warmth. He walked over and gripped her shoulder, his fingers digging into the fabric. He told her that she looked exactly how he wanted, like a prize he had won, not a person he respected. When she tried to pull the neckline up just an inch, he slapped her hand away. He reminded her that tonight was about power, and in this world, she had none. He whispered that her modest upbringing was a weakness he had to fix. The ballroom was a sea of gold lights and cold laughter. Men in dark suits and women dripping in diamonds stood in small circles, their voices sounding like the sharp clinking of crystal. As Sumin led Olivia into the center of the room, The conversations died down. Every pair of eyes landed on her. She felt the heat of their stares crawling over her skin. She wanted to cross her arms to hide herself, but Sumin kept her hand locked firmly in the crook of his arm, forcing her to stand tall and bare. He didn't introduce her by her name or her talents. Instead, he gathered his board members, the men who controlled the city's wealth, and began to speak of her as if she were a piece of property. He laughed about the small, dusty village she came from. He mocked the way her people dressed and the simple food they ate. He told a joke about her accent, and the men around them erupted into polite, cruel laughter. Olivia felt a lump form in her throat, thick and painful. She thought of her mother's handmade shawls and the pride of her ancestors, things that felt like treasures back home but were being treated like trash here. One board member leaned in, asking if she even understood the complex business they were discussing. Before she could answer, Sumin cut her off. He said that she wasn't there to think or speak. She was there to look beautiful and remind everyone of his success. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than the dress. Every time she tried to catch someone's eye to find a spark of kindness, she only found pity or boredom. She was a decoration in a room full of predators. Sumin leaned close to her ear, his breath smelling of expensive wine, and told her to smile. He reminded her that she belonged to this world now, and the world she loved was gone. Olivia forced her lips to move upward, but her heart felt like it was breaking behind the mask. She stood in the middle of the glittering gala, surrounded by people, feeling more alone than she had ever been in her life. The noise of the party was like a wall of sound, but something outside the glass doors caught the light. High above the ballroom, on a balcony that was supposed to be empty, a shadow moved. It wasn't the slow, heavy movement of the guards. It was quick and smooth, like a cat moving through the dark. A young man named Liam stood in the cool night air, looking down at the glittering world below. He didn't wear a tuxedo or a mask. He wore dark clothes that blended into the corners of the building. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room until they rested on Olivia. He saw the way she stood frozen under Sumin's grip, and his jaw tightened. He wasn't there to join the party. He was there for a reason that the people inside couldn't even imagine. Suddenly, the red glow of a security sensor flashed near the door. 2 guards, tall and broad with buzzing radios, spotted him. They shouted and rushed toward the balcony, their heavy boots thumping against the stone. Any normal person would have been caught or would have panicked, but Liam didn't even look worried. As the guards reached for him, Liam moved with a grace that didn't seem real. He stepped to the side, using the momentum of the first guard to send him stumbling into a decorative plant. Before the second guard could pull his radio to call for help, Liam reached out. With a quick, precise movement, he jammed a small electronic device into the lock of the heavy glass doors. The lights on the security panel turned from red to a steady, calm green. The system hissed and went silent. The guards blinked, confused by how the technology had failed them so quickly. By the time they looked up, the balcony was empty. Liam had disappeared into the shadows of the stone pillars, moving higher up the wall where the cameras couldn't see. He climbed as if gravity didn't matter, his fingers finding grips in the old brick that no one else would have noticed. Down in the ballroom, the music played on, and Sumin continued to brag to his friends. No one noticed the small click of a vent opening high above their heads. High in the rafters, hidden by the darkness and the gold banners, Liam looked down once more. He had bypassed the most expensive security system in the city without breaking a sweat. He watched Olivia from the shadows, a silent ghost in a house full of loud, angry men. The game was changing, and the people in the room had no idea he was even there. The air in the room felt thick and heavy, like the moments right before a massive thunderstorm breaks. Sumin's face was twisted with a rage I had never seen before. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, filled with the kind of anger that only comes from being caught in a lie. To everyone else in the office, she was the perfect, hard-working assistant. But to me, she was the person who had just tried to ruin my life to save her own skin.
She didn't wait for me to speak.
She didn't offer an excuse. Instead, she let out a sharp, jagged scream and swung her hand toward my face with everything she had. It was a desperate move, a physical strike meant to silence the person who knew too much. The office staff gasped. I saw Sarah from accounting cover her mouth with both hands, and Mark dropped the files he was holding. Time seemed to slow down until every second felt like a minute. I could see the sweat on Sumin's forehead and the way her silver bracelet jingled as her arm cut through the air. But the blow never came. Before her palm could make contact with my cheek, a hand shot out from the side. It was fast, blindingly fast. With a dull thud, Liam gripped her wrist midair. He didn't just stop her, he anchored her. The sound of the struggle vanished instantly. The room went dead silent. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring, where the only thing you can hear is the frantic ticking of the wall clock and the heavy breathing of 20 people holding their breath. Sumin froze. Her arm was locked in place, inches from my nose. She turned her head slowly, her eyes traveling up Liam's arm until she met his gaze. Liam didn't look angry. That was the scariest part. His face was like carved stone, cold, hard, and completely still. His grip on her wrist was firm, not enough to bruise, but enough to show her that the power dynamic in this room had shifted forever. He didn't say a word, but his silence spoke louder than any shout. He looked at her not as a boss looks at an employee, but as a judge looks at a person who has already been found guilty. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at Liam, then back at the woman who had spent months making my life a living nightmare. For the first time, the fear that had been living in my stomach for weeks started to melt away. Sumin tried to pull her arm back, her face turning a bright, ugly red. She looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, a supporter, or anyone who would take her side. But every single person in the office was staring at her with the same expression, pure shock. The mask had slipped, and the perfect assistant was gone. In her place was someone who had just tried to assault a coworker in front of a CEO. Liam finally spoke, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that made the hair on my arm stand up. That, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife, was your final mistake. He let go of her wrist, and her arm fell limp at her side. The tension didn't leave the room. It only grew. The office was no longer a place of business. It was a stage, and the final act was about to begin. Sumin stumbled back, clutching her wrist where Liam had held it. The silence of the office seemed to shatter as she let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. She looked around at the circle of employees, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. The embarrassment of the failed slap had pushed her past the point of reason. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was desperate to regain control. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. She pointed a trembling finger at Liam, who still stood like a statue in the center of the room. "You think you can touch me? You think you can stop me?" She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. We all watched, frozen, as she made a quick call. She didn't wait for a greeting. "Get up here now," she screamed into the phone. "The office suite. There is an intruder. Deal with him immediately." A few moments later, the heavy double doors at the end of the hall swung open. Four large men in dark suits marched in. These were the private security guards Sumin had hired months ago, supposedly to protect the office assets, but everyone knew they were really her personal muscle. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and wore earpieces that hummed with static. The office staff scrambled out of the way, moving toward the walls. Sarah and Mark retreated behind a desk, their faces pale. The guard stopped just a few feet away, forming a wall between Sumin and the rest of us. Sumin stepped behind the biggest guard, her confidence returning like a sudden flood. A cruel smile spread across her face. She looked at Liam with pure hatred. "Kill him," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "He attacked me. He's a threat to the company. Get rid of him now." The air in the room turned ice cold. We expected a fight. We expected the guards to lunge forward, to grab Liam, to drag him out. I moved to step toward Liam, my heart in my throat, but he raised a single hand to stop me. He didn't look worried. He didn't even look interested. The lead guard, a man with a scarred eyebrow named Victor, looked at Liam. Then he looked at Sumin. He didn't move an inch. None of them did. They stood perfectly still, their hands folded in front of them. "What are you doing?" Sumin yelled, her voice reaching a high-pitched scream. "I told you to take him out. I pay your salaries. Do your job." She grabbed Victor by the shoulder and tried to shove him forward, but it was like trying to move a mountain. The guard didn't even flinch. He kept his eyes fixed on Liam. Liam finally looked up. He didn't look at Sumin. He looked directly at Victor. The corner of his mouth twitched into a very small, very cold smile. "Victor," Liam said quietly. "Is there a problem?" Victor immediately snapped to attention. He clicked his heels together and bowed his head deeply, a sign of respect so intense that the entire office gasped. The other 3 guards followed suit, bowing in perfect unison. "No problem, sir," Victor said, his voice loud and clear. "We were just waiting for your orders." Sumin's jaw dropped. She looked at the guards, then at Liam, then back at the guards. Her face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the hardwood floor, the screen cracking into a spiderweb of lines. "Sir," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you mean, sir?" "Victor, I hired you. I signed the checks." Victor didn't even look at her. He kept his head bowed toward Liam. "You signed the papers, Miss Sumin. But the money came from his accounts. We have always worked for him." The room felt like it was spinning. My coworkers were whispering frantically, their eyes wide. Who was this man? He wasn't just a visitor or a brave stranger. He held the loyalty of the most dangerous men in the building without saying a word. Sumin backed away until she hit the edge of a mahogany desk. She looked at Liam as if she were seeing a ghost. The power she thought she had, the guards, the money, the fear, had vanished in a single moment. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "Who is this boy?" Liam stepped forward, the guards parting like the sea to let him through. He stopped right in front of her, his shadow falling over her shaking frame. "I am the person you should have checked on before you started stealing," Liam said. "And today, I am the person who is taking everything back." The silence in the office was so heavy that you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner. Sumin was shaking, her back pressed against the desk, looking at Liam as if he were a monster from a scary story. But the real change happened behind us. My mother, Olivia, who had been standing quietly in the corner this whole time, finally stepped forward. For months, everyone in this building had looked down on her. They saw her as a simple woman who brought me lunch or waited patiently in the lobby. Sumin had even called her a low-life waitress, to her face, more than once. But as my mother walked into the center of the light, she didn't look like a waitress anymore. She stood tall, her shoulders back, and a strange, royal grace seemed to wrap around her like an invisible cloak. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. She looked at Liam, and her voice, which was usually soft and shaky, came out steady and strong. "Liam," she whispered, "my son. It is finally time." The word son hit the room like a physical blow. The office staff gasped so loudly, it sounded like a collective shout. I felt the world tilt under my feet. I looked at Liam, then at my mother. I had known them my whole life, but in this moment, I realized I didn't know them at all. Sumin's eyes nearly popped out of her head. "Son," she choked out, her voice high and panicked. "That boy is your son? But you're nobody. You're just a servant. You're a waitress who married into a little bit of money." My mother turned to look at Sumin. It was the kind of look a queen gives to a speck of dust on her shoe. There was no anger in her eyes, only a cold, deep pity. "I was never just a waitress, Sumin," my mother said. "I was a woman who chose to hide to keep my family safe. I worked those jobs to teach my son the value of a hard day's work, something you have never understood. You thought you were stealing from a weak girl and her poor mother. You didn't realize you were stealing from the Royal Legacy Group." The name of the company made several people in the room jump. The Royal Legacy Group was the parent company that owned almost everything in the city, including the building we were standing in. They were the invisible kings of the business world. Liam walked over to my mother and reached out, gently wiping a tear from her face with his thumb. The coldness in his eyes softened for just a second as he looked at her. You don't have to hide anymore, Mother, Liam said. The debt is paid. The people who chased us are gone, and the people who tried to hurt us here are finished. He turned back to the crowd, his voice becoming loud and commanding. My mother is Olivia Vance, the rightful owner of the Vance estate and the majority shareholder of this firm. She has spent the last year watching how you treat people when you think no one important is looking. I watched as my coworkers began to tremble. They remembered every mean comment they had made behind my back. They remembered every time they had ignored my mother in the hallway. Sarah looked like she wanted to faint, and Mark stepped even further into the shadows. But Suman was the worst off. She sank to her knees, the realization hitting her like a tidal wave. She hadn't just bullied a coworker, she had tried to destroy the family that owned the very air she breathed. The waitress-turned-wife story she had used to mock my mother was a lie she had invented to feel superior. The truth was that my mother was a queen who had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reclaim her throne. Please, Suman sobbed, reaching out toward my mother's skirt. I didn't know. I can fix it. I'll give the money back. My mother stepped back, avoiding Suman's touch. She looked at Liam and gave him a small, firm nod. The time for mercy had ended. The queen was back, and her son was ready to clean house. Suman stayed on her knees, her hands shaking as she looked up at Liam. The office was so quiet that the sound of her heavy sobbing seemed to echo off the glass walls. She looked like a broken puppet whose strings had been cut. She kept babbling about mistakes and money, but Liam didn't look moved at all. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thin, black tablet. You think this is just about what happened this morning? Liam asked. His voice was calm, but it had a sharp edge that made everyone sit up straighter. You think I just showed up today to save my mother from a slap? He tapped the screen a few times and then turned the tablet around so Suman could see it. On the screen was a complicated chart filled with names of banks and holding companies. At the very top, in bold letters, was the name of Suman's father's company, the massive empire that gave her all her power and pride. For 5 years, Liam began, stepping closer to her. You have walked around this city like you owned it. You used your family's name to bully people. You used their wealth to hide your crimes. You thought your father's company was a fortress that no one could ever touch. Suman squinted at the screen, her eyes red and puffy. What is this? She whispered. What are you showing me? I started buying shares when I was still in college, Liam said. Every time your father made a mistake, I was there. Every time the stock price dropped even a little bit, I bought more. I hid behind 10 different shell companies so your family would never see me coming. He scrolled down the page, and a bright red number appeared at the bottom. It said 51%. The color drained from Suman's face. Even with her mind racing, she understood what that number meant. In the business world, 51% meant you were the boss. It meant you owned the majority. It meant you could fire anyone, sell anything, and shut down the whole operation with one phone call. I didn't just want to stop you, Suman, Liam said, his eyes cold and focused. I wanted to dismantle the world that made you think you were untouchable. As of 8 o'clock this morning, I am the majority shareholder of your family's parent company. I own your father's office. I own the car you drove here today. I even own the house your parents are sitting in right now. A collective gasp went up from the office staff. Sarah actually fell back into her chair, her mouth hanging open. They weren't just watching a workplace argument anymore. They were watching the total destruction of a dynasty. Suman shook her head back and forth, her hair falling over her face in messy clumps. No, she groaned. No, that's impossible. My father would have told me. He would have stopped you. Your father was too busy covering up your latest scandals to notice me, Liam replied. He looked over at Victor, the lead guard, and nodded. Victor stepped forward and handed Liam a thick stack of legal papers. Liam dropped the papers on the desk next to Suman. They landed with a heavy thud that sounded like a coffin closing. Those are the eviction notices and the termination papers. I've already sent the orders to freeze all company accounts linked to your name. You are no longer an executive. You aren't even an employee. You are a stranger in a building I own. Suman reached out to grab the papers, but her hands were shaking too hard to hold them. They spilled across the floor, covering the expensive rug. She looked around the room, hoping for one person to help her, but everyone was looking away. The power she had used to scare them was gone, and without it, she was nothing. Liam looked at me and then at our mother. The mission he had started years ago, in secret and in silence, was finally finished. The empire that had tried to crush us was crumbling at his feet, and he didn't look happy or sad. He just looked like a man who had finally finished a very long, very hard job. "The locks will be changed in 10 minutes, Liam said to the room. "Victor, please see that the former assistant finds her way to the street. She won't be needing her keycard anymore." The shock of Liam's words was still ringing in the air as my mother, Olivia, stepped forward again. While Liam had handled the money and the stocks, my mother held something much more dangerous: the truth. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a small, silver flash drive. She held it up so the entire room and the security cameras could see it. "You thought the basement of this building was a safe place to hide your secrets, Sumin," my mother said, her voice sounding like cold steel. "You thought that because you had the keys to the heavy doors and the codes to the scanners, no one would ever see what you were doing down there." Sumin looked up, her eyes widening. A new kind of fear, one even deeper than the fear of losing money, took over her face. She tried to speak, but only a small, choking sound came out of her throat. "I wasn't just a waitress or a mother watching from the sidelines," Olivia continued. "While you were busy shouting at the staff and pretending to be a queen, I was watching the delivery trucks. I was tracking the files that never made it to the shredder. And I was talking to the people you treated like garbage, the janitors, the guards, and the delivery drivers." My mother walked over to the large conference screen on the wall. With a quick movement, she plugged the drive into a port. A moment later, the screen flickered to life. It didn't show spreadsheets or bank numbers. Instead, it showed grainy, high-definition security footage from the hidden basement levels. The footage showed Sumin meeting with men in dark coats, men who didn't work for the company. It showed her handing over crates of stolen goods and signing papers that redirected company shipments to illegal warehouses. But most importantly, it showed her talking about the other powerful families in the city. On the recording, her voice was clear as she laughed about how she was stealing from the other syndicates and blaming it on the boy and his mother. "This hasn't just been sent to the police," Liam added, standing beside our mother. "About 10 minutes ago, this exact footage was delivered to the leaders of every major family in this city. The same people you tried to trick. The same people who thought you were their partner." As if on cue, the phones of the security guards began to buzz and beep at the same time. Victor looked at his screen, his face turning pale. He looked at Sumin, and for the first time, there was no respect in his eyes. Only a cold, professional distance. "The syndicate has seen it," Victor said to Liam. "They're calling for a meeting. They're very, very angry. They feel that Sumin has broken the most important rule of the streets. She stole from her own kind." Sumin let out a long, low wail and slumped against the desk. She knew what this meant. In our world, losing your money was bad, but turning the other families against you was a death sentence for your reputation. She had tried to play a dangerous game, thinking she was the smartest person in the room. She had used her power to crush the underdogs, never realizing that those underdogs were actually the ones holding the lease. "You turned your back on the people who trusted you," my mother said, looking down at the broken woman on the floor. "And now, those people have turned their backs on you. You wanted to be at the top of the empire, Sumin. Now, you can watch from the very bottom as it all falls apart." Liam signaled to the guards. "Take her out. Use the back exit. The other families are waiting for an explanation, and I think it's time she gave them one." As the guards grabbed Sumin by the arms and began to drag her toward the door, she didn't fight back. She couldn't. The basement truth had come to light, and the girl who wanted to rule the world was leaving it with nothing but the clothes on her back and a very long list of enemies. The heavy doors clicked shut as the guards dragged Sumin away, her screams fading into the distant hallways. A heavy silence returned to the office, but it wasn't the scary, tense silence from before. This felt like the air clearing after a long, dusty day. Every employee was still standing perfectly still, watching Liam. They were waiting to see what the new owner would do next. Liam didn't go to the CEO's desk. He didn't sit in the expensive leather chair or start barking orders. Instead, he walked over to the large glass windows that looked out over the entire city. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of deep gold and purple. For 5 years, he had worked in the shadows, fighting a secret war to protect our name. Now, for the first time, he could stand in the light. "I didn't buy this company to be a boss of the underworld," Liam said, his voice calm and steady. He turned back to face the room. "The old ways of fear and secrets end today. We are turning this empire into a legitimate powerhouse. From this moment on, we build things. We create things. We treat our people with the respect they deserve." The employees looked at each other. You could see the hope starting to grow on their faces. Sarah from accounting wiped her eyes and stood up a little straighter. Mark finally stepped out from behind the desk. They realized that the reign of bullying and lies was over. Liam wasn't just a new leader. He was a different kind of leader. He had the power of the old families, but the heart of someone who knew what it felt like to have nothing. Liam walked back to where her mother was standing. She looked at him with so much pride that it seemed to glow around her. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers locking with hers. For so long, she had walked through these halls with her head down, pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had lived in the darkness to keep us safe, carrying the weight of the family's secrets on her tired shoulders. "It's over, Mother," Liam whispered so only we could hear. "The hiding is finished. You never have to look over your shoulder again." He led her toward the main exit. As they walked, the employees did something unexpected. They didn't just move out of the way. They formed 2 straight lines, creating a path of honor. As my mother passed by, they bowed their heads, not out of fear, like they did for Suman, but out of real, deep respect for the woman who had endured so much. We walked through the lobby, past the front desk where Suman used to ignore us, and out through the massive front doors. The evening air felt cool and fresh against our faces. A line of black cars was waiting at the curb, their engines humming quietly. Victor stood by the lead car, holding the door open. Liam helped our mother into the back seat. He looked back at the tall glass building one last time. It was no longer a place of pain or hidden crimes. It was the foundation of a new future. He had taken the throne, not by using a weapon, but by using his mind and his loyalty to the people he loved. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked at my brother and my mother. We were leaving the world of shadows behind. We were finally walking into the light, together, as a family that could finally breathe. The city lights began to twinkle like diamonds, and for the first time in my life, the future didn't look like a threat. It looked like home.